Excuse me. Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say, everybody. It's not quite afternoon yet. It's 11:54 a.m. And, yeah, this is about the pandemic. We're 1 year into it now. I'm sure we all remember where we were, what we were doing, how we found out when the pandemic went full-blown pandemic. I was at home, relaxing, and I got a text message saying that Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz had tested positive for the coronavirus, and that the game between the Utah Jazz and, forgive me, I don't remember who they were playing. I know it wasn't the Dallas Mavericks, but they were playing another team. And that it was at, I think it might have been the Oklahoma City Thunder, because I think the game was at Utah. And they had to cancel the game before they ever started. So they sent everybody home. We didn't realize just how crazy this whole thing was going to be. I mean, remember those crazy days when we thought it was just going to be a few weeks and this thing would be over with by Easter, perhaps even Memorial Day at the latest, and that everything would turn back to normal. Boy, were we wrong. I'm talking too fast. We're now a full year into it. Plenty of areas have full restrictions still on, although Texas foolishly has decided to lift them because, hey, it's a full year, we should be over with this by now. Well, we're not. As much as I wish we were not, we're not. There is hope. The vaccines are out. They're being distributed. I haven't gotten mine yet, but I probably will in the next, I'd say, month or so. I'm not really, by the way, this is allergies, plus the fact I'm fat. I'll speak about that in just a moment. The vaccines are out there. Cases are slowly starting to go down. Although there is, since I said earlier that Florida and Texas, should have mentioned Florida, are wanting to go full bore, completely open things back up, we may have this around for a while longer. The one thing this has shown, big time, is the lack of coordination between governmental departments at the federal, state, and local level. We have allowed politics to interfere in emergency situations. And this was an emergency situation. We have become so divisive that when faced with a pandemic of this proportion, we have lost far more people than we should have. Far more people got sick because of this. It's easy to throw the blame game around. That's what sometimes you hear about people who just want to solve the problem. Well, let's face it. The blame, primarily for our poor response to this, is the former administration of Donald Trump. There is no doubt whatsoever that because of the lack of preparation, the fact that his administration stripped necessary resources set up by the previous two administrations, Obama and George W. Bush's, that we were far from ready for something like this when just a few years before, when Obama was in office, we had the resources that could have dealt with us. Now, could we have saved far more lives? Maybe. Could we have prevented far more cases? Probably. Could we have blunted this at the beginning? Yes. But the problem is the divisiveness that has been in government for a long, long time, in politics for a long, long time, would have meant that even if this had happened during the Obama administration, and even if they had taken the necessary steps to halt this from getting in as quickly as possible, there would have still been people getting in. There would have still been people who would have filed lawsuits saying that it's illegal for the government to tell them they can't fly to such and such place, that they can't restrict themselves and all of this. This year has sucked. This past year has sucked. Let's face it. Not just because of the coronavirus, but because we have been exposed to the realities of what is going on. The deep divisions in our nation. The fact that our political leaders can't come together and solve problems because they're more interested in raising money and keeping their base satisfied. Now, I know that many of you probably are tired of hearing about coronavirus. That you're tired of having to stay home all the time. That you're wanting to go out and have all the freedoms you had before the pandemic. And I definitely understand that. It sucks. But the reality is that because we did not take this seriously right from the beginning, because we didn't do what was necessary right from the beginning, because we didn't establish what was needed to be done by all citizens right from the beginning, and to squash misinformation, to squash people who are trying to let their twisted idea of what freedom is, which is basically freedom without any responsibility to your fellow citizens or to your nation as a whole, take over. It started from the very beginning when Donald Trump did not want to acknowledge that this was a problem. And then when he acknowledged it, he claimed it was a Democratic hoax. And then when the full weight of what was going on was undeniable, he mismanaged it even further. There were a few things he did. He shut off air travel to China, which was a good move, although it was probably too little too late. The problem is we had the tools to be ready. President Obama and before him President Bush had set up the protocols after the SARS virus of 2003. Now that, thankfully, never got beyond just a few cases and a few deaths. It was mild compared to this. It never got out of control. We used to have a pandemic response team. We used to have the CDC with a wealth of resources. But the truth is, as much as it may hurt the Republicans and people who like Donald Trump to hear this, Donald Trump foolishly got rid of those resources. That is a fact. Now, I'm not saying that the Democrats are, good either. But we had those resources and they were squandered. And instead of acknowledging the mistakes and trying their best to make up for them, they chose instead to attack. Because how dare they complain? The harsh realities are that we're no better off than we were a year ago. Yes, we do have the vaccines. Yes, we've got far more masks. Yes, we probably have more PPE and all this. But that's not the point. The point is we're still very divided. The point is that if there is another crisis like this, another kind of pandemic, it doesn't necessarily have to be something similar to this, or a natural disaster of unprecedented magnitude. Not just another hurricane, not just another earthquake, not just another bunch of tornadoes. Climate change is real, regardless of what you may hear from the right wing. The scientific community has said, with overwhelming majority of 97%, if 4 out of 5 dentists say to buy a certain toothpaste, and you buy that toothpaste, that's 80%. You're going off what 80% of dentists say. If 80% of dentists say to buy a certain toothpaste, wouldn't you tend to believe that you should believe that climate change is a real thing if 97% of climate scientists say that it's a real thing? The reality is, there is evidence to support that storms are getting worse, stronger, slowly but surely. We can debate all we want to about whether it's man-made or natural or a combination of both. It's happening. If it's natural, we can deal with it. We have the technology, and if we don't have the technology, we can develop it. If it's man-made, we can definitely try and fix it. We can't stop it completely, but we can slow it down to adapt ourselves and our lives to it. My theory has always been it's been a combination of the two. I think, in my honest opinion, I'm no scientist or anything like that, but I think we're still coming out of the last ice age. We're still warming up from the last ice age. But because of the Industrial Revolution and the stuff that we've done, we've exacerbated it. We've sped it up considerably. And instead of adapting to it, we have ignored it. And instead of trying to find a way to reverse the changes in some way to make it more bearable, we have decided instead to simply ignore it. Because we've been fed lies. Lies that have been put through the media, certain parts of the media, by companies who are afraid their bottom line will be affected by the acknowledgement of climate change. What does this have to do with the pandemic? Think about it. What governors are the ones who are chomping at the bit to open things back up fully? Republican. Who are the ones that are most likely to get contributions from corporations and business interests to open things back up? Republicans. This is something that needs to be addressed. Modern day capitalism is not what the capitalism that you and I learned in civics class or economics class or whatever back when we were in high school. It isn't about competition in the free market anymore. This is the robber baron era 2.0, where there are virtual monopolies. it may not be the classical definition of monopoly, but when you only have two realistic cell phone companies, Verizon and AT&T, when you only have a handful of internet companies, and in many places there's only one you can either get. The one we have here is AT&T. Yes, there are some smaller options that aren't nearly as good. But the truth is, if you live in a rural area, you're screwed for internet. There's a reason for that. We've allowed companies to merge. So instead of companies competing against each other in the free market to offer a better product at a fair price, companies have been bought out by bigger companies so they can jack up the price and offer fewer services. Look at your health insurance. If you've been in the workplace for 30 some odd years like I have, or more, you've noticed a disturbing trend. You're paying more for health insurance and getting less. Now, of course, prices over time go up. That's the nature of things. But you expect to still get at least a similar amount of service. You don't expect to get less for what you're paying. If you go to the grocery store and you've always bought eight hot dogs in a pack for $1.50. And suddenly that very same pack shrinks down to 6 hot dogs, and you're paying $2.15 for them. Well, let's say, I can buy another pack of hot dogs. What if that's the only hot dogs there are? Or the only quality hot dogs? The others are not nearly as good. Or they're similar in the sense that you're getting less and paying more no matter what product you get. Look at cereals. Back when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, there was a disturbing trend. Sensing that the marketplace was not, people weren't buying cereal like they did before, they decided to offer smaller boxes, but at a deceptively cheaper price, when in reality, if you look at the price per ounce, you're actually paying more. You're not really getting value. Competition is no longer what makes American capitalism. It's all about the strongest corporations. And those strong corporations have a lot of political influence, unnecessary political influence. The kind of political influence that over a century ago Teddy Roosevelt warned us against. And for a time we listened. After the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was related to Teddy Roosevelt, said the same thing. They put in safeguards to prevent corporations from having the massive influence they had before the Great Depression struck. Well, for a few decades, it worked. Then, over time, they wore down those protections, those corporations. They found ways to get around them. They convinced Congress to overturn them. And 11 years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision that effectively said corporations are people, and they can contribute as much as they want to politically, which basically freed the corporations to spend what they want and to use propaganda to promote their own agendas. What does this have to do with the pandemic? We're basically left with a private healthcare system woefully inadequate to deal with the situation because instead of focusing on patient care, their first objective is profit margins. Every other industrial country has some sort of form of national health care. Effective national health care. Now, we hear all the time from people who protest against the idea of national health care in the United States that the United States has the greatest health care in the world. A, that's not necessarily true anymore. B, even if it were still true, it's kind of like saying that, yeah, you've got the greatest healthcare system, but you have to be rich to essentially afford it. Because if you get cancer in this country, you're going to go broke. And in any other country, you would not go broke. Any other industrialized country, if you get a debilitating disease, like cancer, like a stroke, like getting struck down by the pandemic, you're still living, but you're still suffering from symptoms of it that may take a long time, if ever, to recover from. Somehow we have been convinced by people that if we have nationalized health care, that somehow or another it's betraying the American way of life. That is an abject lie. It has been. It is somehow making us think that if we make the better decision to have a better healthcare system for all, that if we were to adopt this system would allow businesses to not have to worry about healthcare because the government would be doing the healthcare. Businesses would, yes, they'd pay more taxes, but they'd save money and not having to have their own healthcare plans for their employees. But there's so many arguments for it, but yet we keep hearing. And you want to know who funds those arguments? The very for-profit healthcare system that knows that they are doomed if people decide that they want a national healthcare system. The problem is that people believe that if they get a national healthcare system, that they won't have any choices. There are choices in industrialized countries. Australia, Canada, Germany, England, the whole lot of them have public health care and a private health care system. There are options. The problem is we have been convinced by propaganda that the so-called Canadian healthcare system, there are long wait times and blah, 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 when even the experts in Canada said, look, this is a lie. The people who know have said this is a lie. But you buy into it because you've been told by your politicians that this is not the American way. Well, here's the thing. Is it the American way to continue to do something, even if it's at the detriment of the very population? If it baffles me that we have this argument, that we have to continue to have a system that clearly does not work for the most American people. That if you get a disease like cancer, that it could very well bankrupt you and cost you your house potentially. There's a plethora of stories out there about this. There was a story the other day about a 7-year-old raising funds by having a lemonade stand because it was to help fund her treatment for brain cancer. And you actually think this is a good story? In any other industrialized country, she wouldn't have to worry about that. the government would cover the funds. The government would cover the treatment. But you say, why should I have to pay for somebody else's health care? You already do. If you were in a for-profit healthcare system, healthcare insurance, it's called group healthcare. It spreads the cost. What you actually think you were paying for your own healthcare, no, you're paying for everybody else's in the group plan. That's why. What part of the word group did you not get? It's just a smaller group. Was Obamacare perfect? No. Is it perfect? No. There's a lot that could be done better. It was a start. That was the thing that people forget. It's a start on a better system. It got rid of pre-existing conditions. If you already had cancer, let's say as a child, and you develop a totally different cancer, guess what your healthcare system could do before Obamacare? They could deny you coverage. We don't have to pay it. It's pre-existing. In no other industrial country do you have to worry about pre-existing conditions. Here you had to, until Obamacare took it away. And now all of a sudden, it's a bad thing. Because, well, my healthcare premiums went up. And that's the fault of somebody getting cancer. Or perhaps that's the fault of a company that's more interested in profits than actually providing a service. And here we are, in the greatest healthcare crisis this nation has faced, and the world has faced in a century. And we haven't learned a damn thing. We made a lot of the same mistakes. We had to take our pride and go, well, I'm not going to wear a mask because it goes against my freedom. No, it doesn't. You just wear a stupid mask for a while. You think I like it? I know people don't like it. But because we had leaders that said, oh, it's repressing your freedom. No, it's not. I'd like to take these anti-mask people, round them up, and send them to Venus. And I am dead serious. If they didn't start the lie, they perpetuated the lie. All because of their concept that nobody can tell me what to do. Okay, if there is a hurricane coming, and they declare a state of emergency and have a mandatory evacuation, why is it that the people that stay there, they tell them that you're on your own? Because they're going to be on their own. Because the emergency management people need everybody to leave. Because if they all leave, then the emergency management people could pull their resources and protect their own people. But because we always have a few selfish people, emergency management people have to stay in place because I guarantee you that if those foolish people get hurt, somebody's going to raise Cain about it that the emergency management people weren't around. In California, in places where there are earthquakes are frequent. Building regulations require you to build up to code to protect the people inside those buildings as best as possible. It's not 100%. Nothing is 100%. But it gives them a better chance of surviving an earthquake with these regulations. But yet there are people who complain about them. They drive up the cost of construction for an event that may or may not happen. The last earthquake in California was a major earthquake in California that I can remember right offhand, and people will probably correct me about this, was 1994's Northridge earthquake. Before that, the 89 earthquake in San Francisco. Earthquakes can happen at any time with very little, if any, warning whatsoever. It's imperative that we listen to the experts. It's imperative that we don't just assume that the private sector can do every single thing right. There are some things the private sector should not do. They should not have a role over how your child is educated. They should not have a role over how your health care is determined. They, frankly, should not have a role about how people are locked up in prison. We've given the private sector too much power in this country because the private sector's primary objective is always profit, first and foremost. There are businesses who go, well, it's not just profit for us. Even with well-intentioned businesses like that, they have investors. Or if it's a privately owned firm, they want to make money. They don't want to just break even, they want to make money because they need to invest in their own business. And I'm all for private businesses in the right sectors. When it comes to healthcare and education, and even corrections, it should be the public sector. A well-regulated public sector that is accountable to the people that they serve. The pandemic has exposed a lot of faults in American society. Faults that many of us knew they were there, but were ignored before then. And people are still ignoring it because, hey, we've convinced ourselves we're the greatest country of all time, and we're great in everything. We're not. We're far from it. We used to be in many things. But then other countries got better ideas and flew past us. Instead of going, hey, those are good ideas, let's adapt those to our system. No, we had to stick with what worked for us, apparently. Or instead we go, well, let's let the private sector handle it. We're finding out that's not always the best case. Yes, there's a few places where it does work. But those are not as common as you think. Take charter schools, for example. Good idea to begin with. There's actually a really good one in the county I live in. But unfortunately, more and more charter schools are shown to be basically money-making ventures that barely give the kids a decent education. But because we've been convinced that private sector is better than public sector, we let them get away with it. Even though the private sector doesn't want the same amount of accountability that the public sector gets, and the public sector doesn't get the kind of accountability it needs. Why? Because for decades, there's been a movement to undermine the public sector because there's money to be made. And heaven forbid we get in the way of somebody who wants to make money. The truth is that this could have been prevented. We had the resources to have found this out before it even left China. We could have stopped travel a long time before it actually was stopped. But there are so many other lessons we've learned. We haven't learned. Look at the George Floyd case. The fact that we still have a lot of racial inequality in this country, and that there are people who will be blind to it, blind themselves intentionally, because they believe, well, we're not, at least it's not the 50s or the 60s. It's still there. The problem is it's there and people don't mind it being there. And they go, why can't we go back to that time when white people were in charge? In a time that was supposedly the good old days. When in fact, they weren't. At least for many people. The truth is that we aren't what we once were. We're not the greatest country in the world anymore. We can still become that. We have to humble ourselves and realize we don't have all the solutions. There are other nations that have better ways of doing things. Why can't we adapt them? The pandemic has proven that we have got to fix things. If we don't fix things, the next pandemic that comes around, and there will be another one, could either be one or two things. If we're ready for it, the SARS virus of 2003, which got some headlines, caused a little bit of nerves, but didn't do much of anything. Or it could be like this one. Politicians ignore it because they don't want to have to deal with the ramifications of it. And then when the ramifications become clear, they want to just play the blame game and just throw China under the bus because of where it originated, or wherever else this originates. And the next time it may not be the coronavirus, another offshoot. It may be Ebola. It may be the West Nile virus. It may be something completely different. There's an astonishing amount of scientific ignorance in this country. This nation was made, in part, great by scientists, by inventors, by people who knew what they were doing. But because for some reason we've got it in our heads that the scientific community is supposedly out to get the average American, or they don't know as much as they think they know, we throw them under the bus. And then when something like this happens, we wonder, how could it have happened? Do I really need to go there? We are a great nation. In some ways. We have a great military power. We have a great economic power. But we don't have the best education system anymore. We don't have the best healthcare system anymore. It's not widely available like it should be. It is no longer the case that we're number one. Jeff Daniels in the TV series The Newsroom, in the first episode, said it best. You can go online and find the clip. He can say it better than I could. He broke it down. Granted, he used a little bit of naughty language, but he broke it down. If anything, we've gotten worse. He stated that over a decade ago. And we've gotten worse. We don't want to acknowledge that we are lacking in certain things because we don't want to destroy the idea that we aren't great. And some people don't want to believe that Donald Trump didn't make America great again. That was not his intention of ever making America great again. He simply wanted to make himself great again. It would have been bad enough if the pandemic had never hit. but it did. And what is sad is that someone who blatantly mismanaged the greatest crisis this nation has faced since World War II got 75 million votes. And that there are people who are so blind to the fact that he isn't all he claims to be, still claim that he actually won the election. He didn't. He lost, and he deserved to lose. Because when we needed true leadership in the greatest healthcare crisis in a century, he didn't provide it. He never came close because of one thing. And this is not just about him. This is about a lot of people similar to him that only think of themselves, that only think of their money and their power. Selfishness is the problem. The me first attitude. It has infected this country to our detriment. And that is why we are in the situation we're in. And what is sad is it spread to other countries. They see us protesting it, and they go, we should protest it too, when the reality is we shouldn't be protesting this. That had we listened to the experts, had we listened to people who knew what they were talking about, we could have been over this. We could be going to baseball games with no mask. We could have had the vaccines ages ago. Had we been ready for it. Had we had the people ready to go right from the start, prepared for something like this. But we didn't. The blame is obvious. It's not just on the Republicans. It's on a political system that has divided Americans consistently. How do we bridge that divide? I really don't know. Or, I do know, but we won't do it. Maybe changing the media to where they go back to actually just telling the news and separating news from commentary, instead of what we see today, which is basically personality-driven news shows that are more or less opinion programs and not actual hard news that tells you the facts. That we actually have accountability in government, a system that where whistleblowers can blow the whistle when things are going wrong, laws are being violated, ethics are being compromised. And instead of punishing the people breaking those laws and breaking those ethical standards, we punish the whistleblower for having the audacity to undermine our elected officials that suppose on one particular party or one particular president. The pandemic, as I said earlier, exposed a lot of faults in our nation. The challenge is, do we fix them? I would like to think that we'd learn from this. My fear is we're only going to learn the wrong lessons. And the people will say, we should have trusted more, because they'll say, well, it wasn't as bad as they originally thought. When the reality is, it was far worse than we ever imagined. Imagine where you were a year ago. And I came to you and said, the pandemic is going to sicken 26.6 million people. It is going to kill 500,000 people. If you'd have told me that, I would have said you were lying. It can't possibly ever get that bad. We're talking Hollywood here. But it did. And the crazy thing is, it could have been a lot worse had there not been some leaders who stood up against those who wanted to ignore the ramifications of this pandemic. Let me first of all state for the record that I'm employed in a business that is primarily due to the pandemic. And that when this pandemic is over with, I will lose my job. Either I will have gone to another job, or the position will be eliminated. The job's easy, pays very well, and I could selfishly say, I'd love to keep that job forever. The truth is, I don't. I've seen the effects of the pandemic. I've not lost anybody in my family to it, but I've known people who have. I've not known any friends to die of it, but I know people who've lost friends because of it. I've known people who knew people who've been gravely affected by it. I've known people who have been affected by it. 1 in every 10 people in my county have been affected by the virus. It's now going to be close to 1 in 9, maybe as soon as 1 in 8 very soon. There is still the chance I might get it. And I've done everything within reason to keep myself from getting it. Let us not forget that this nation can do great things when we give ourselves the opportunity to do it. We can have a great public educational system again. We can have a great public health care system again. We can have great roads again. We can have a correction system that keeps prisoners from coming back by actually reforming them and not just housing them to punish them. It's important to remember that there are lessons to be learned from this. Maybe in the final analysis we may learn a few things. Maybe not all we need to learn, but a few things nonetheless. My fear is we will learn nothing at all. If anything, we may regress. Because people will want to go, well, we don't want that. We don't learn that because it may restrict our freedoms. Are you truly free if there is the risk that you may get some kind of disease that could have easily been prevented? There's a lot of lessons to learn from this. And in the coming weeks and months, I will try to explain them to you in a way that you might finally understand why we screwed this up. Why you not wearing a mask constantly when you go out means you helped to screw this up. Why your denial of this helped screw this up. While the perpetuation of the myth that this is some sort of hoax, or it's not as bad as the media makes it out to be, cost people their lives, cost them their health, and cost people their jobs, including mine. Before this hit, I had a good job in a company that was doing very well. We were very busy until the pandemic hit. Then the bottom fell out. I worked in a company that manufactured merchandise displays. We were doing gangbuster business, working 7 days a week sometimes. When the pandemic hit, orders dried up. It's kind of hard to build merchandising displays when the government officials are saying people shouldn't go out to stores unless they absolutely need to. The company is still in business, but it's running a lot smaller than it did before. And the truth of the matter is, they may never get back to the way they were before. That means I'd have to find another job somewhere else after this job I currently have ends. There's no guarantee that job will pay me as well as the one I had before the pandemic hit. We haven't learned a damn thing. We haven't. We should have, but we didn't. Or some people have, but most people haven't. Or they know what they should learn, but they don't want to do it because they are afraid that if they do, that somehow this incompetent yet complexly evil government will try and take away a smidgen of their freedom to have the audacity to protect the American people in general. I suggest to those people they read the preamble of the Constitution, where it says to promote the general welfare. That is in our Constitution. There is no such thing as total freedom for the individual. There is no such thing as complete and utter freedom. Because if that were the case, we'd live in anarchy. Freedom comes with responsibilities, not just for yourself, but for your community, your neighbors, and your country, and to a greater extent, the world. That is why you simply can't build a nuclear power plant on your property. That's why there are regulations there. Or build a coal mine wherever you want to. Government isn't perfect, but it isn't the evil, satanic thing that the right wing makes it out to be. If properly regulated and properly run, it can do great things. But that's the problem. The people funding our politicians don't want that. They want to make money in any way they can. If it means providing bad service and health care and education and the corrections and whatever, they get their greasy hands on. These aren't the people that sell you bread in a grocery store or prepare you a hot dog in a restaurant. These are people who, simply put, don't care about how they get their money just as long as they get it. And they don't care who they got to step over to get it. That's not freedom. That's feudalism. You're living in a modern day attempt to rebuild the caste system from Europe. Good old-fashioned feudalism. Where we are once again modern day serfs. Serving the noble lords known as the Fortune 500 richest people. That our votes are merely there as a steam valve, steam pressure valve, to prevent us from thinking that maybe there's another way. Another time I'll go more into depth about it. About why we are the way we are. But I'll leave that for another time. A year ago it all started. We all thought it'd be over with by now, but it's not. Maybe one day it will be. Hopefully soon. Thank you for listening. If you've gotten this far, which probably you didn't, but I don't necessarily do this just for the clicks. I do this basically as an audio blog. But once again, thank you for listening if you made it this far, and have a great day.